Good evening, this is the Oscar expert here with Brother Bro, and it is time to review The Northman. This is the newest film from Robert Eggers, who is known for creating immersive, dark, and meticulously crafted pre-1900s set films. And his latest is an action epic, takes place in 895, and it's about a prince who, after witnessing the death of his father, dedicates his life to vengeance. I thought this film was a beautiful big screen experience. It offers brutal spurts of action and battle amidst slower paced drama. It's very dirty, bloody, visceral, masculine. I just felt like I was watching this thing wide-eyed because Robert Eggers and his crafts team in both the visual and the auditory department really put so much into every minute of this film, ensuring that the audience is just wholly immersed, not just in the period, not just in the action, but in the psychology of this main character, who is just full of rage and hate. To me, this film is all about the presentation. I didn't really find the story that interesting. I thought it was actually very thin. Until about 2/3 in, this movie went through some pretty familiar beats. It has a revenge storyline, and that is just inherently hard to get me like emotionally invested, because revenge films take a pretty certain shape, and here it was more the atmosphere, the time period, and the way it is shot that was roping me in. Not so much the storyline, because I'm sort of like waiting for it to surprise me or do something that I don't expect. And I do think it gets there, but I really do feel like this film is carried by the cinematography and the sound. I think it goes for as high impact as possible with generally minimal storytelling. Even though some of the story is actually kind of weird to follow because, like other Eggers films, he inserts a lot of mythology into it. The spiritual, mythological element can just be a means to understand the characters at a very deep psychological level. It's very period authentic too. From the dialogue to even the lighting. Some scenes look like they're lit by fire. They may or may not actually be, but it definitely doesn't feel like this thing was shot in a studio with a bunch of lights. A lot of the scenes, especially the ones with the more bluish haze, I thought felt more dreamy or perhaps nightmarish, and that captures a little bit of, you know, again, this character's psyche. I think the visual palette goes for realism to the point where sometimes I was like, yeah, this feels like it could look better, but overall I really like the choice to keep everything really realistic looking. They're not like painting any skies into the frames. Like if it looks like a cold and cloudy day, like that's what the frame is going to look like. I agree that it felt like it was working with sort of a minimal story, but amping up everything else to make you experience that in a really intense way. And I did find it emotionally compelling, actually, to my surprise. Not that I necessarily related with it, but the fire and rage and fury got to me. The feral energy, the roaring. There's a lot of roaring coming from men in this movie. We talked about after the movie, I'm actually surprised to hear you say that you had this connection with those elements of the film, because I didn't really feel that at all. I just felt like I got exactly what the movie was trying to offer me, immersing me in this very strange world and in this character's bloodlust. I don't know how immersed I could get in a character's bloodlust. That's the thing with me. Like, in a revenge story, I don't really care if the character gets what they want or they don't. Like, I'm not on the character's side. I don't think the movie's on the character's side either. But it's just like that premise kind of loses me where that's not what's bringing me in. Let me put it this way. It's like listening to maybe a metal song or a song with like a really fucking chunky guitar riff and just being like, yeah, like feeling it. It's not that I necessarily have those feelings that maybe the guitarist is having when he's chugging along, but like I can feel and experience that. I guess that's how I would put my relating to this movie. This has some of the best combat hand-to-hand action that I've seen in quite a while. I would compare some of it to like The Revenant. Like that fight scene between Tom and Leo in the end. That kind of brutish shit, I think, was in this movie. And there are a lot of long takes too, so you can kind of compare it on that level. But the long takes, you know, it wasn't just about being impressive. It wasn't just doing the long take to do the long take. I mean, obviously, when you get long takes in action scenes, you do experience it in a more intense way. But those shots also captured something else that was incredible. There are scenes where you're watching combat, and also in the frame, or maybe in a different part where this camera drifts to, you'll see like people in the village or children running out of their homes and screaming and stuff like that. And then I'm like, oh my God, like that happened to the kid in the beginning of the movie. Like that adds an extra layer to all these action scenes. There's always something kind of sad and tragic underneath all of the action. Yeah, I was watching, I was like, yep, this world sucks to be in. Everything about this world sucks to be in. And you're like, oh, the tragedy, the sadness, the depth of the sadness. Also, I have to slightly disagree with saying the action or the combat is like the level of The Revenant. Because one thing I felt like in The Revenant was like, oh my god, this looks so fucking real. It's insane.
This
like when real. Like in the ending scene when like they're biting each other's fingers off, I was like, what the shit?
That like
and
basically
in this film, movie. It looked a little more like choreographed to me. Like I would see someone go and be like, oh, where like, you know, an elbow is not gonna like kill anybody, or like somebody misses and then there's like a hiya, like
with the nitpicks, man.
No, it's not a nitpick though, because the film is so based around the action, and you know the filmmaking is very confident doing these scenes in one take. You know, for the most part, I appreciate it. So maybe this is a nitpick, but like the whole risk of doing scenes in one take is that you can feel the seams, and I don't know if they completely disappeared for me. This is an example where I was like, the filmmaking is very good. It is very challenging to pull this off, but I don't know if it had the same impact on me. Maybe it was the story for me. Like that's a point that I could look within on. Like, is it the story that was making me not feel like totally invested in the scenes?
I don't know where you're coming from on this, man. I mean, I have no complaints about any of the action in like the entire movie. I mean, when they're on the fucking volcano. That's insane. It's like insane that the movie did that.
And like, what? I don't think it's insane. And it's not insane. I don't know. They like choreographed the fight. They did it in one take. Where they were like, the lighting was beautiful in the scene.
That's what I'm saying. It's like the poeticism of it. Like,
sure, the presentation and all that. I don't disagree with that. It's about like, it didn't bring me like so close to the brutality. It's like it was a well staged, like almost ballet like kind of fight in a sense, but not one where you're like unaware that it's like a choreographed thing.
Okay.
And again, I'm saying it's hard to hide that when you do long takes. It's very hard to hide that. I don't know. I mean, I haven't seen it done so well as The Revenant.
I guess I wouldn't put it quite on the level of like the opening scene from The Revenant, but like I think it's in the ballpark.
I'm also ready after this film to say that Robert Eggers has a signature medium shot where the character is like very in the center, like almost looking at the frame. And he frames the characters like this very often when there's a moment between them. And I think he does a great job at that. Like, he'll bring you from the kind of floating camera long take, and then you'll lock into a character and like their connection with something or somebody where they're almost looking in the camera. I thought those were really nice moments.
The sound is also amazing. If there's any justice, and there isn't, then it would get an Academy Award nomination for Best Sound. I mean, it was very intense.
Yeah, the sound also does a lot of the work in making you feel like every hit in those action scenes.
Also, I think the score is just excellent. Love the percussion and the detuned strings. I love how dirty the score feels. I feel like most movies go for a very polished feel where you got like a nice orchestra playing all their instruments in tune. It just felt more raw this way, and they never overdid it with the score. Absolutely no complaints about like the way that it was utilized in these scenes. I thought it was just perfect.
Yeah, the score's really one of those elements where it was somewhere between like A24 going nuts and then something that actually works in a Hollywood movie. Like, it was right in between, kind of a sweet spot, I thought. In a weird way, that's how I felt about a lot of the elements in this film, or even as the film as a whole, that in many ways this is taking risks as a studio film. Like, all the mythology scenes, you know, I could see some producer being like, all of those are unnecessary, take them out. And on the other hand, like, this is really delivering in terms of action and entertaining you with enough combat scenes that you feel like you are full by the end.
Yeah, there are people saying that there wasn't a ton of action in this film and you shouldn't expect it. And going in, I thought there was going to be less. There was a lot of combat in this movie, and there was a very satisfying amount.
You know, you use the word satisfying. I think the movie is, you know, on one hand, it's making this commentary on the stories that we tell ourselves about Vikings. And, you know, obviously, like with revenge films, you can't make a straightforward revenge film. That's kind of like fucked up. And this one does reflect on itself and on that genre, on the whole quest. Kind of like The Green Knight, and how, you know, you dive into the mythology, you immerse yourself in that world, but you also like critique it from the inside. I like that this movie does that. I think it does it well. But on the other hand, there's a straightforward revenge movie in here. Like, the quest is fulfilled in a sense that the expectations the audience has for this film are all fulfilled. So like, the movie's separating itself from the character's morality, but at the same time, like, the audience gets to indulge in that quest.
Yeah, it's like, on one hand, the action is like kind of fucking awesome.
Right.
And on one hand, there's something like terrifying about it all, where I'm like, oh, it's not
awesome, but I'm also kind of feeling like it's awesome watching it. And I'm also like, the tragedy of it all.
And the other thing that I wanted to point out with the sort of being between like a Hollywood movie and an A24 film is that the script was in some ways like you could see the plot points, you could see the really obvious things that a Hollywood script has to do. I could see people walking away being like, that was kind of generic. That's kind of how I felt. In terms of the plot, the shape that it takes, it's all pretty standard. Of course, the way it does it is interesting.
Well, I definitely agree. Like, when you look at classic stories, like, you know, something out of Shakespeare, it's not like anything we haven't seen before necessarily. You have this character that's, like, blinded by their something, and, you know, the movie represents that with mist, something like Macbeth or Hamlet, those kind of old tragedy tales. This movie is definitely similar to those. And I think it knows that. I think it leans into that. It definitely leans into the minimalism of the story. But I liked that it was just very elemental. I liked that Robert Eggers took a rather simple story and elevated it and milked as much as he could out of it to give you something very cinematic in its presentation. You kind of wanted something like a little more, I guess, complex or a little more to chew on. And I would say maybe in the middle stretch of the movie, I could have used a little more of that maybe. I wouldn't say the movie ever dragged, but I did think that the strongest points of the movie were the beginning and the end. So I agree with you, it's not the most complex thing, but it's also something I like about it. And I liked how psychological the whole thing was. There's a layer to this where we are just experiencing this from the character's perspective. We're experiencing the story that he thinks that he is on.
The filmmaking is objectively impressive, but it just wasn't enough for me to feel invested throughout. I was kind of watching like, I don't need to finish this film, but I guess I'm curious what is going to happen.
Wow.
And I did like it, again, toward about 2/3 of the way through, with a great scene from Nicole Kidman. It did rope me back in. And I think from there to the end is very good. And there's some more interesting things going on with the story and, you know, subverting itself a little bit. But even that, I don't think I took away much in the end.
I would say I did take away something about how hard we all stick to the story that we tell ourselves and how hard we resist when that's challenged. Yeah, Nicole Kidman, like you said, has one scene where she just absolutely brings it.
I think she has a couple.
I think she was the supporting standout. And Alexander Skarsgård, I mean, this is a pretty amazing performance from him. Like, he is just snarling and growling and walking like this, and it's insane. Like, what he's doing is nuts. This entire movie just felt like it had just such fangs. Thought it was pretty goddamn excellent. I would give it a 9 out of 10.
I would go with a 7 rather than an 8. Not because I think, like, oh, it objectively deserves it. Like, this is a very fucking well-made film, and it's really cool. But because I don't feel like I needed to see it.
Wow. It's the most I've disagreed with you on a movie in a little while. I actually liked it better than The Lighthouse and The Witch, but I haven't seen those movies twice, so that could change. Those movies might grow on me. Some of you will want us to talk about awards, and this guy back here. I would say if there's one category the movie is the best shot for, like maybe costumes. I feel like that category can fit something weirder in there, but I don't think it's going to happen. No. Obviously, like if it were up to me, this movie would probably be getting sound at the very minimum. I would definitely consider it for cinematography, production design, costumes, score, like all that technical shit. But you know, it's. I don't think it's gonna happen. I don't even think there's gonna be really a campaign. So don't get your hopes up.
I don't even think costumes is very likely.
No,
they were wearing no shirts the whole time.
Nicole Kidman had like some Queen shit on. Thank you for watching. Thank you for subscribing. Who are you planning to kill?